Hey, here's some news that made me happy. California will become the first state to require LGBT history curriculum at public schools. So a little bit more about this. The state became the first to implement statewide recommendations on how to include the discussion of LGBTQ and disabled people in classroom lessons under the Fair Education Act. Now, you might be wondering exactly what does this mean? What are we going to be talking about? Now, the new textbooks won't roll out until November, so we can't exactly know exactly what is going to be taught in these curriculums. But to give you an idea, the social science and history class frameworks will have second graders learning about diverse families, 8th graders discussing gender roles in the 19th century, and 11th grade students studying the LGBTQ civil rights movement. And these textbooks will also be accessible to other states for public schools that are interested in implementing a more progressive curriculum. This made me very happy because I think that it's such a crucial part of history that is ignored, that when you are a member of the LGBT plus community, you sort of have to go out and do your own research. And I also think that it will be great to talk about gender roles and to just talk about different families and different gender expressions and sexual identities at an earlier age, so it normalizes kids that might feel really different. Because I know when I was in kindergarten, I already knew that I was different from my other classmates, and if I had had maybe some sort of a curriculum explaining that I'm not crazy, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm sure they're going to be using the appropriate language, like second grade language. It's not going to be overly sexualized, which is often the very, well, seriously, Hasan, like a lot of times when you hear the—
Who's concerned that like they're not gonna—
They're like, don't expose kids to like sex stuff too early on, which is not what this is talking about. You're just trying to expose and just expose kids to different ways of being a human in the world. And when I was growing up, I felt like I was probably the only one that was this way. So it would have been really cool to just learn about in broad terms, and then when you get older, 8th grade and 11th grade, in more specific terms and with a little bit more context, that you're not alone, and that we have stories and history to tell and the contributions of the LGBT community to American history. I think this is awesome, but I also think—
Are they gonna talk about the mythological feud, like the myth that feud was based off of?
Oh, you mean like Betty and Joan?
Betty and Joan?
No, they're not. Why would they talk about? They should talk about Betty and Joan, but they were not gay. So I don't know why it would come up. Although it's a great part of history. If you're not watching my reviews—
I just wanted to make a joke about. Never mind.
I review the show Feud on FX. This is so unrelated to this story. It's the highlight of my week every week that I get to talk about it because I love this show. So check that out.
What do you think they would include as far as LGBT, like prominent figures of in the LGBT community from history?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think of who they definitely should include. Now, Harvey Milk is an obvious contender. And
that's recent.
I know, that's really recent. And then you'd have to look back at, are we gonna speculate on Eleanor Roosevelt's sexuality, which is, a lot of people—
So that's exactly what I want to talk about. Not Eleanor Roosevelt specifically.
Right.
But what I wanted to talk about is, and this is something I'm fascinated with, and I've had this conversation, if you remember, with your brother, who loves history, is the, not fetishization, but like the, what was the term he used? Like looking at historical figures that may or may not have been gay and speculating on whether they were gay.
Right.
So, because if you go down that route, that's like opening up a whole new door, and
true.
That would also scare off a lot of moderates that were possibly in favor of this. Whereas if you talk about like openly gay or anyone that was a prominent figure, whether it was an ally or not of the LGBT community, or all the legislation that they passed, or all the civil rights movements that people participated in, as far as like pro-LGBT movements, right? That's all understandable. I'm personally fascinated on whether or not Abraham Lincoln might have had a thing with his bodyguard.
So what I will say about that is I think it is easy to look back at historical figures and speculate, or new things will come to the forefront and be like, oh, they might have been queer, and that's kind of cool just to know that it wasn't. LGBT history is not as recent as we think, but I think that—
Well, if you look at ancient Greek, then it's like,
Right, but I think that I'm hoping that these textbooks will treat things like that very delicately, because this is such new territory. Because if you speculate too much, then it just sort of undercuts the whole message of trying to have LGBT inclusion in history books. And really a lot of this also, when we're talking about social studies, we're talking about gender expressions, and I think talking about gender roles in the 19th century and how things have moved forward is so cool, and it's something that I'm shocked is a little bit groundbreaking these days. But I think that if we can just focus on getting confirmed fact-based LGBT history correct and doing that first before we go back and revise historical figures, I think that's probably the responsible way to do it.
And not to be like another super Debbie Downer moment here, but not to be that person. But my other concern on top of that would be the similar whitewashing that you see when discussing, prominent figures, like prominent black figures, or like the obvious whitewashing that we see when discussing any sort of other minority group and how they were treated in American history, where it's kind of like, Native Americans, they were savages and we brought them civilization. I mean, we kind of fought a little bit, but then they're happy now.
No, I mean, Hasan, that's a great point, because
how would they do that with the LGBT history curriculum if they could? And that's something I'm concerned with as well.
A really recent example of that was there was a movie that came out, I believe, called Stonewall. It was about the Stonewall riots, which a lot of people cite as the beginning of the gay rights liberation movement, the gay rights movement. And in the movie that came out, it was really whitewashed because the people that led the Stonewall riots were people of color, were queer people of color. They were people who were trans. I'm blanking on her name right now. I think it's Audra something. She was a black lesbian, and she was someone that was one of the first people that threw rocks at the Stonewall riots, and when it was presented on a major motion picture platform, it was totally whitewashed, and it was just like white gay guys. So it is important that we hold everyone accountable, and that if we're going to be sharing these stories, that we're doing them in the way that is factual and correct and responsible
and inclusive.
And inclusive. And I'm very excited about this. I would like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think other states might adopt similar textbooks and curriculums? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you next time on Pop Trigger.